Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new Record Club episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where each week one of us picks a record for everyone else to review, and then we review it. And this week, it's my recommended record, and we're going to be talking about an album from a band that, quite honestly, is so big in the world of music and a band that we all love so much that it's kind of insane that it took us this long to talk about them. But we're going to be talking about The Cure's album Wish from 1992. And one of the reasons that I elected to pick this record is because, there's no shortage of great, highly canonized records you could go with this band. You've got Pornography, you've got The Head on the Door, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Disintegration, and even late career sort of albums that I know Ryley and I will go to bat for, like Blood Flowers.
We're kind of approaching this in the sense that this is us covering like not an unconventional Cure album, but like maybe not one of the ones that's kind of loftily held up critically and just in the general zeitgeist as one of their peaks necessarily. But this is their best-selling album. It's definitely the album that most people have heard, just in general. Even if we don't think of it in the same sort of canonized way as like Disintegration, for instance. So it's interesting that we're kind of approaching this as somewhat of a, because it's kind of like it's regarded and well respected and it gets its due for what it is and for it being this kind of massive moment for the band in terms of like cementing a breakthrough into the mainstream that they had been kind of slowly etching away at for basically a full decade. But as a holistic artistic statement, this is an album that doesn't get talked about in that way. It gets talked about in reference to Friday, I'm in Love, right? It gets talked about in reference to being this kind of commercial peak, to being like The Cure fully boarding the wave of alt rock in the early 90s without sacrificing any of the distinct signifiers or aspects of who they were or their distinct sound. It's really interesting in all those different ways, but at the end of the day, I see very few people talking about The Cure's Wish as an album. So that's why I'm kind of stoked you picked it.
All of that is part and parcel of the reasons that I wanted to talk about it. And it is certainly an album that I think has picked up a bit more of a good reputation and reception, generally speaking, over the years, just maybe more recently, as like an album that more people are kind of discovering because of that commercial peak and going back to, just because, wow, I should really listen to the album that has maybe one of the most omnipresent pop singles of all time. And notably, this is not by a lot, but I would say pretty confidently that this is my favorite album by The Cure. So this is one of my favorite bands. This is my favorite album by them. So I only felt it natural to eventually talk about it, seeing as this is one of my favorite records. And just to kick things off, not really has much to do with the music, but this is certainly in contention for one of the albums I love the most, with a god-awful album cover. Jesus Christ, what is happening on here?
Something that I do think is not really ever is kind of left implicit or obvious, and so seldom stated, is that The Cure in general are bad at album art. Like, they have very few good album covers. Like, I guess Disintegration is fairly evocative, but it's even that looks a little bit cheesy with Robert Smith's mug staring up at you. Yeah, and everything else.
Pornography's pretty cool.
It's definitely like very 80s and very like kitschy in that sense. But yeah. But like Head on the Door is just an incomprehensible mess of an album cover. Blood Flowers is like just everything post Disintegration, every cover post Disintegration is dog shit, just absolutely awful. That's going to be the fullest extent of anything negative we're going to say in this episode, and it is purely like circumstantial. It is like, it's not even relevant to anything else.
Well, that's the thing, is that I feel like a lot of people, this is sort of a weird psychological thing, is that it's kind of like a barrier for entry for albums that don't have like the most whole, like complete, like hey, you need to listen to this. Like if album has even slightly less than a great reputation, and it has an album cover that
Well,
again looks like this, which looks like a low res JPEG version of itself with a bad gradient in the background, a terrible even the later covers, which are literally drawn by fucking children, that like the self-titled is drawn by a child. This album, on the other hand, I don't even know what it's going for, so it's not exactly helping. Like I've literally gone in to my iTunes library and changed it to like the alternate vinyl cover art interior just because I'm tired of looking at it and it's ugly as shit. But
um all this to say, to try and like mine something meaningful out of this, is that
mhm.
regardless of the aesthetic enjoyability of the Cure's album covers, there is something childlike and kind of like death of innocence like about the Cure's music, something that kind of evokes this sort of fall from the like it's very like, they're not an emo band, but like they presage so much emo music, and Robert Smith presages so much emo stuff aesthetically and in terms of the way that he performs as well. And I don't know if I can fully explain why, but just the kind of childlike ugliness and just kind of scrawly, just bizarreness of a lot of their album art, it kind of works. It kind of feels like it accurately portrays a kind of pubescent melodrama, or like a just kind of like gothic sort of this cover is like the kind of thing that I like if I was like a super emo in high school, and I was like, emo art kid who was like, I would be making like collages and shit, and I would be making stuff that kind of looks like this. I would be doing like weird things with like string and like making like collages of just shit. And to me, it just like, I can't explain why, it just reflects a kind of mindset that these albums also sort of put me in, which is interesting because
Ryley with
like,
a fringe in the back class being like, oh, it represents my pain.
well, like it's interesting because like Robert Smith, I mean, this is okay. So the Cure as a band at this point in their trajectory are basically like, coming up on 15, 20 years they've been around, right? And they've been a pretty constant presence, right? They, right from the late 70s, they were kind of like one of the big figures up with like Bauhaus and whatever in that gothic post-punk realm. So they've been around for a long time. And not just they've been making music for a long time, but they've had a presence for a long time. And what's interesting about that, when you look at a record like Wish or any of the later era Cure records, is that Robert Smith is kind of ageless, right? Or if anything, he kind of Benjamin Buttons in a certain sense, because it's like he doesn't age in terms of his perspective or the way that he sings or anything about him as a persona. But if anything, he kind of regresses more and more into this kind of like pubescent sort of like premature like stage of just kind of like emotional melodrama. And that's one of the things that I think makes records like Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me and Disintegration and this album like so compelling, because not only is it like, it's not like, a dark trip into the, into broken psyches or whatever. It's like all of these albums make me feel like I felt when I was like 15 going through my first heartbreak, or like when I was just like barely even able to comprehend all the emotions I was feeling in puberty and whatever. And all of this is stuff that Robert Smith channels, and if anything, seems to get better and better at embodying as he gets older. As the band go on, as they kind of move away from the sort of more abstract and industrial sort of post-punk stylings of where they came from, as they move more and more into the realm of pop, and as they kind of catch up with the distinct aesthetics laid out by bands like New Order and Depeche Mode, the Human League actually as well, who Robert Smith directly mentions as a direct influence on this album. They kind of like, it's funny, like they are so in their own lane as this kind of gothic pop band in the 80s that eventually they catch up with the actually big British bands of the 80s who were like much more into combining like rock instrumentation with electronic textures and making some of the most iconic music of the 80s. And it's like the Cure are kind of late to that party in a certain sense. You know, records like Disintegration and this album kind of feel like they come in some ways almost like a half decade too late, but also they kind of come right on time as well, because it's almost like those gothic aesthetics fused with that sort of post new wave flavor, essentially, that the Cure would increasingly integrate more and more and more into their albums, starts to resemble what alt rock and grunge and all these kind of darker subgenres of rock music were becoming over in the US in the 90s. And so the Cure are kind of this moodier, more dour equivalent of that in a certain sense. And so Wish is a really interesting album to zero in on, because it comes out like right at the height of grunge mania. Like, this album was released in April 1992. Right, so right at the period where over in the States, this kind of, you know, slightly lackadaisical, hapless, crooning sort of rock music was just really starting to take hold with the youth. And that way the Cure are both ahead of their time and kind of arriving at this juncture perfectly. All this is to say that Wish is simultaneously their most accessible and friendly album, partly because of the era in which it came out and the way in which the Cure were able to figure out how their aesthetics and sound as a band best fit in that realm, and ultimately resulting in them making some of the most accessible and friendly and just immediate music, but also being an album that kind of extends and takes a lot of the ideas of Disintegration, which is like an overwhelmingly sort of dark and maudlin and just brooding album with like really long songs, especially in the back half of it, that just really take you on this trip through this kind of thunderous, stormy, you know, inner trauma, essentially. And it takes those aesthetics and it finds a way to package them in a format that makes them both more accessible, but also kind of refines them to like the most perfect version of them. Like, because I love Disintegration, I probably would still even put it above this in my Cure ranking, but it's like this album takes some of the things that record does so well and almost refines them to the point of perfection, where all the shagginess and all the kind of languorous rambling of that album are reined in here in a way that makes this record feel, I think, a little bit easier to connect to. And all this is funny because it's like, it's still a 66-minute album. It's still a really long record where it's like peak CD era sort of stuff. And you do still get really long songs, but they don't feel it in the same way as the songs on Disintegration do. And also, they're so well integrated in between these peepier, like more just concise numbers. I mean, not just Friday I'm in Love, but also songs like High as well, and Doing the Unstuck. You know, these are tracks that take what the Cure are so good at and find a way to just really just peel back the layers and just get it refined to something so much simpler. You know, and it's not something that's new to them. It's not something they're doing for the first time. I mean, they made great pop songs on Heat on the Door and Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. But it's like here they found a way to integrate that pure pop songcraft into this brooding, stormy, languorous tone that they had leant into once they essentially got the pop out of their system, more or less, with Hit on the Door and Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me. So yeah, anyway, that's a very long-winded way of saying a very basic thing, which is that this is, in a lot of ways, I think, the quintessential Cure record. I mean, it's not as culturally groundbreaking as Disintegration. It doesn't have as many of their most well-known songs on it as that record does, but it feels like this is an even truer vision of the Cure as a band and all that they're good at than that record even is.
The Cure kind of oscillate between two different modes for me, in being a band that have really tightly structured, really concise really kind of hard-hitting albums like Faith, albums like Pornography, that really feel more in keeping with that more gothic, like, you know, that sort of place that they really came from. And then they would sort of drift away to something a little bit more ambitious and far-reaching as they went on. And I have this issue with albums even as far as Disintegration, that I still think that like all of the longer Cure albums are still just a little bit too long. And Wish is the only one of the long albums to me that gets away with the runtime because I think it's paced the best. Even the longer songs on here are kind of sandwiched between moments that are a little bit more digestible. And in terms of talking points and digestible moments, just to get to the point of where, like, you know, I want to appreciate this album for being the complete total package that it is. So I feel like it's only fitting that we talk about the thing that everyone talks about when they talk about this album, that being Friday I'm in Love, which is their biggest song, maybe their most still lingering, culturally omnipresent pop song. I mean, you can go, like, literally, I have worked retail for 6 years now. I have probably heard this song maybe 9 out of 10 every 10 days I've gone to a retail establishment. And that's not even aside from the fact that I, you know, have to go to other stores to like get groceries and shit. So more or less, I've heard this song maybe, you know, almost every day of my life, basically, at this point. And I know that a lot of people can, like, I've met plenty of people that say like, oh, this is overplayed, I can't enjoy it anymore. But the thing is that those people are weaklings. This is a perfect pop song. That's not a hot take. I'm not busting down any doors by saying that, but especially within the context of Wish, which again, this is not the darkest Cure album by any stretch of the imagination, but Friday I'm in Love, and even again, there are songs on here like Wendy Time and High that are a little bit more peppy, a little bit more upbeat, more up tempo. This is still overwhelmingly quite a dour record, and it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, even
Mhm.
amongst the breezier songs. This is notably just a song that contains almost no like legitimate darkness, even though it refers to that darkness by saying, you know, I don't care if Monday's blue, Tuesday, Wednesday too. I mean, which is some of the catchiest refrains Robert Smith ever wrote. That's one of the great things about him as an artist, is that he's able to sort of harness this incredible fucking ambition with some of these longer songs and instrumental ideas, and really just kind of, again, take you on a journey like you do on albums like Disintegration. But also, he is one of the world's greatest pop songwriters, because there are a litany. I mean, like, there's at least 10 other songs by this band that are absolute staples of pop radio still. And this is, of those songs, I'd say this is probably my favorite, mainly because it both exists as this perfect singular catchy thing that you just, this is one of the premium sing in the car fucking songs that I have listened to on several journeys of my own. um but it sort of serves as an emblem to the greater album, in that this is an album that focuses on the idea of mania, the idea of just like manic depression, really, and how this is sort of the counterpoint to the rest of it, of the high of the manic spell, and how you can just be so overwhelmingly possessed by the love that you have for someone that it just kind of anchors you through all of the bullshit in your life. And that's kind of an overriding theme with not even just this album, with other songs on other albums too, is that like this band is rightfully a, you know, a sad boy staple, but you would be so shocked at how many of Robert Smith's songs are just odes to how much he fucking loves his wife. More than a couple of those songs are on this record. And it's really sincere and really just kind of mines it for all of the emotion that these instances can be worth. And I don't know, it's it's just one of those things that's inescapably perfect to me, and it draws a lot of people into being fans of this record, rightfully so. But it's just perfect. What can I say?
Well, I mean, it's telling that you said before that it's one of those songs that you've basically involuntarily been exposed to millions of times on a near daily basis. Yet still, in a road trip context or whatever, you would choose to listen to it again. Like, you don't need to hear. This is a song that neither of us need to hear again, ever.
No,
But we will still choose to listen to it because
doesn't
it
make
is
that jangle pop ass intro with that reverb guitar, the boom 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 boom
it,
boom.
it's just it's full body shivers. I mean, I completely agree. This is an absolutely perfect song. You know, I think it is probably, it's not my absolute, it's not my absolute favorite. It's probably my second favorite song on the album, but like it's probably the greatest
It's not
song.
even top three, honestly, but
It's
I'm
probably
just
the greatest
fucking.
song on the record, I think. It probably is just the most musically accomplished and thrilling. And you know, it's funny, it's like there's a story about how, you know, originally it sounded a little bit slower. The pitch and the key was down a little bit more originally, and there was like an accident in the studio where it accidentally was like pitched up or sped up or something, and they ended up liking the way that that sounded even more, and it was just ended up being the version that they went with, even though it wasn't originally intended. So so like it does stand out. It sticks out on this record from basically all of the other songs around it. It kind of just doesn't quite fit in the cohesive sonic journey that you're being taken on. But that ultimately ends up being a weird strength of it. Certainly helps it in isolation, but even in the context of the record as well, when you're talking about Mania, when you're talking about this, so like there's this interesting like sort of recurring theme on this record of like trying to like sort of force yourself out of your own misery. Like if you think about a song like Doing the Unstuck, for instance, which is super tongue-in-cheek, super like kind of almost satirical and just sort of gently mocking as well, poking fun at the idea that, you know, people who are depressed just need to kind of like cheer the fuck up, you know, but also like getting at a kind of ugly truth beneath that, which is that like, though that is obviously an incredibly reductive thing to say, like at the heart of it, there's some truth to it. Like there is this kind of like a part of depression, you know, obviously a huge part of it is something that is just out of our control and very difficult to overcome. But there is always an element of it where it's like, I could be doing more to get myself out of this.
Especially in the context of when you consider the fact that the album before this was Disintegration. You, in many ways, I see these albums as ones that complement each other. Disintegration is an album about wallowing. It's about self-indulgent sadness in a lot of respects. So it feels like this is a conscious counterpoint to that record and that statement. So it manages to feel like less of a sort of one-dimensional statement to me. Is it these two records back to back really feel like they capture the manic highs and lows of what make this band so great.
Yeah, it's like it is a kind of polar opposite thematically in that sense. You know, Disintegration is, as you're right, is so much about wallowing. And I mean, the iconic song on that record, Pictures of You, you think about that. That song is just like one of the most just gut-wrenching songs about, you know, obsession and love and fixation ever. And all of that has a completely different spin here. It's not, I mean, it's not all sunshine and roses, you know, there's like Robert Smith writing the way that he is, like even the most ecstatic of feelings comes with this kind of like deep weight of existence alongside it. But if you think about a song like Open, the incredible opener to this album.
My favorite Cure song.
Wow. It's a great choice. Like it's a great opener because like it's impossible to like as soon as the song kicks in, it's like I could not turn this album off if I wanted to. It's just one of those songs that just throws you in. And lyrically, again, this is where we get to what we've been saying about how this is such a counterpoint to Disintegration in some ways. I mean, you're right. This album is so much about, you know, how much Robert Smith, you know, loves his wife, loves his partner, loves what he has that keeps him tethered to the world and that gives him the most lush and life affirming of feelings. And this is a song that is, I mean, really, it's beautiful, and it's
Mhm.
life affirming, and it is comforting, and it's also like so full of energy and just this I don't want to say like verve or like joie de vivre or anything like that, because that's taking it too far. But there's like this sense of just closure and cathartic connection in this song. Is the way he talks about being in this environment with this person. It's like a whole new emotion from Robert in a certain sense. And it's like you just get pulled into it, and it's such a swirling, just mess of a song that you just get completely lost within, and it earns every minute of its 7-minute runtime, and just is such a beautiful trip that just throws you into this album. And I mean, that swirling kind of unfixed, just completely free falling tonality that the song has is fitting, because the protagonist of the song is drunk and kind of getting drunker as the song goes on. And there's there's that refrain of the rain comes down hard, that's how I feel inside. The analog between the rain and drinking, it's just such an amazing song. I can't even think of the right words to describe it. It just is. I mean, it's your favorite Cure song, so I'd love to hear like what it does to you and what you think of it.
To me, if Friday I'm in Love is sort of the fixture on this album that represents why Robert is a great pop musician, this to me is more of the why the Cure are a great album band as well. This is sort of the ideal Cure deep cut kind of song. Again, it's really on the longer side, and it is like it has a lot of energy, but like the emotions of this song are just so fucking complicated. It's a very dark song, but it also is anchored by the fact that the protagonist is kind of stumbling through this experience, which is like, again, kind of a manic high of like he's drinking, but he's also having like a paranoid episode. One of the lyrics that always kind of leaps out at me is and I'm starting to laugh like an animal in pain, which actually makes me think of the end of Friday I'm in Love, where if you listen to that song, you hear the end of it, and he's got this moment where he just like loses his fucking mind, and he's just like, and you're just like, what the fuck was that? And that's kind of the sound that I imagine that he's making on something like this, as it does actually sound like an animal in pain a little bit. But the way he says stuff like falling into strangers, and it's only just 11, and I'm staring like a child until someone slips me heaven, and I take it on my knees just like 1,000 times before, and I get transfixed. That's fixed. And I'm looking, and I'm just looking at the floor, just looking at the floor. Yeah, I look at the floor. Just someone who is so completely removed from reality, they just have to stare at their shoes beneath them in order to like not fall over, whether it be from drunkenness, but whether it be from anxiety. And it's just like he's continually like there's like 90% of a given verse of this song will be incredibly dark, and then again it's anchored by the sort of consistent the consistent focal point of the person that he cares about. It's like just being at like a social gathering is sort of where it puts at it. Like, and it's a great sort of depiction of what it's like to exist in a public space with anxiety problems. It's like there's so many different emotional facets and tones to this song that it doesn't feel like it adheres to one specific thing. And I feel like that is one of the best qualities that this album has, is that even when it sort of sticks to a more monochromatic maybe song, it still complicates it and kind of muddies the waters a little bit. And like I don't know, the instrumental here is a lot of what has to do with my love for it. I really want to shout out the rhythm section on this whole album, really, but specifically on here, courtesy of Boris Williams, who's been with the band since like Head on the Door.
Mm.
And good golly, the drum fills on Open are so fucking good. It's hard to almost like focus on something like that, but it'll be like at the end of a verse, and then you just hear this, and it's like a little bit muted, but you're just like, God damn, that was vicious. But it's because it's sort of away from the front and center instrumental idea, which is like the overriding identity of this album to me is just this record has my favorite sounding guitar tones in all of music. Like this instrument to me has never sounded better, both in like a multifaceted way, and that on here it sounds really like bright and incandescent, and you almost feel like you're going to be blinded by it. And then there are songs in like the latter half of the record that are super like watery and really kind of tranquil and languid and a little bit like wider. They hit with less impact, but there's a depth to them. And on here, it's just, again, this swirling, almost psychedelic feeling. The guitar tone here barely even feels like it's anchored to an instrument. It just feels like its own fucking world that the rest of the song just happens to inhabit. And I can't get enough of it. This track could be twice as long as it is, and I would eat that shit up, because I've just gone back and listened to the opener over and over and over again, and they'll be like, all right, fine, rest of the album now. But still, this is one of my favorite songs like ever, and it's a perfect sort of crystallization of why this band is fantastic. And that's the thing about this album, is that it's 12 tracks long, and I think that the first sort of half of the album is like fucking amazing. Again, we also mentioned a song like High, which is a great counterpoint to how, like, again, languid, long Open is, and how, again, it's a bit more of a song that I get lost in its atmosphere, whereas High is a little bit more traditional The Cure sound, just sort of filtered through this album's distinct sonic aesthetic. And it's a great song. And then like it sort of shows you the sort of art of album construction and sequencing, and that it's 3 minutes 40 seconds. It allows you to sort of sink yourself into the more immediate aspects of the record, and then right after that you go straight into a part which is a fucking, God fuck me, man, this is like, it's like literally just a song off of Disintegration.
Well, yeah, he
again,
writes like
through here.
The first two songs are like these beautiful, like life-affirming statements of connection and devotion, especially High, right? Which is almost like cheesy.
Oh yeah,
in the way he kind of talks about his wife like a kitten or whatever he says. And
kitten as a cat.
And and then a part is
so
just
funny.
like, it's like he can't bear to be in that mode for so long, and he just has to completely veer back into just unabashed heartbreak.
Exactly.
I think that, if I have any minor critiques of the record, it's that some of the sequencing in that first half does throw me off a little bit, and I think placing a part in there is kind of an example of that. But it's really ultimately a nitpick, because then we get my favorite song on the album, which is From the Edge of the Deep Green Sea.
Oh, such an underrated song.
Which is like, it's kind of a vision of this post-disintegration potential direction that the band could have gone in terms of like really fully leaning into that alt rock sound and taking it in this like super gothic direction. The song is kind of one of the heavier musically on the album as well. It's just got this barreling pace and this intensity to it. One of the, I guess, limitations of The Cure, I suppose, if you're going to analyze them, is that Robert kind of does, in a lot of ways, write the same song over and over and over again. It's kind of hard to talk about what the song is about and differentiate it in any meaningful way, but it is just this complete sonic odyssey, in the same way that my favorite songs, like the title track on Disintegration and some of those brutal journeys into like the heart of human darkness are. But this is like, it's not as nihilistic as any of that either. It's actually incredibly romantic, again, which is in keeping with the other parts of the album that we've already talked about so far. It's kind of like this sort of cheesy, like cinematic romanticism as well. This kind of like, sitting in the rain, sort of like holding hands and kind of like, having fallen so far and yet still sort of clinging to each other. And it's just like, it's pure The Cure, it's pure Robert through and through and through. And I just I'm annoyed. I hate that I can't like fully convey why I think this is like such a cut above for me, but it is like the most me execution of the Cure's whole vibe on this entire album, of the, you know, relentless brooding emotional heaviness of their previous records, combined with the like starry-eyed, you know, head over heels affection that this album is kind of characterizing itself around. And it's just, to me, one of the most like over the top executions of that fusion. And because of me being me, me being like the avowed emo lover, I am so in the bag for when this kind of shit is done in such a melodramatic way. It just always gets me. Although that is contrasted by a song that is, I mean, certainly sentimentally, it's, you know, equally sort of over the top and hyperbolic, but like in every other respect, it's much more restrained. And yet it's my other favorite on this album, you know, Friday I'm in Love Aside, which is the song Trust off of the second half.
Phenomenal.
I mean, I am way too like strung out and just completely dead inside at the moment to actually fully have a physical response to music today. But when I was listening to this morning, Trust was the song where I came the most to just losing it and like fully bawling. I mean, this song is just so
the most I am going to do it song on this album.
I mean, look, it is it's like, it's kind of like Robert taking, you know, the affection and the attachment and the love for his partner that he's espoused across this record and just taking it to the most extreme point possible, where it's like, without you, I am dead. Like, I am nothing.
It is such a Robert Smith concept to make what is ostensibly a heartbreakingly sincere, again, forwardly kind of emo, but kind of wholesome love song. Like, if you look at the lyrics to this, it really just kind of depends on how you play the song tonally and instrumentally as to how you can interpret it. Because it's like, you could sing this, like, this is basically this album's Pictures of You, except that is like a wistful, nostalgic, it's sad, but it has an undercurrent of legitimate joy, but it was, you know, for times long gone past. It's about nostalgia. Whereas this, to me, is a song that's like, I literally love this person so much that if, like, you know, the rest of the world could be empty, but it would still be okay if you were here. But if you aren't here, then literally just fuck everything. Like, it's so fucking, like, he manages to turn the most committed, sentimental, heartfelt feelings into the saddest thing you can possibly imagine. That sort of lonely piano intro, which is fucking gorgeous. And he fucking starts with, there's no one left in the world that I can hold on to. There's really no one left at all. There's only you. And if you leave me now, you leave all that we were undone. There's no one left. You are the only one. And I feel like that kind of back and forth, like from both Trust and From the Edge of the Deep Green Sea, like that, so telling that these are two of your like biggest tracks, is that to me they embody some of the album's best like moments writing wise, and that conceptually speaking, a lot of these songs deal with the perspective of like a couple, from like, you know, different perspectives of that person. And like From the Edge of the Deep Green Sea, to me, is a song that's like, it is kind of, you know, hard on sleeve emo shit, but it's also like a real acknowledgement of the fact that the both of these people are insanely fucked up. Like, you have the girl in the song is like, her head's her head is on fire, is one of the lyrics. And Robert Smith's like sort of analog in this song is so just completely dedicated to this, that it's like a slavish devotion, a sort of emotional dependency. And the fact that both of them are fucked up in this particular way, but they're still going to utilize that to be there for each other. Whereas trust really kind of feels like it turns that sentiment around and showcases the potential toxicity of a relationship like that, where if you put too much of yourself into it, then you're just going to wallow in your own misery if like literally anything goes wrong. That sort of really hyper manic kind of bipolar sentiment. It's so gorgeously conveyed with how beautiful this fucking song is.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, it's also basically the closest this record gets to a ballad, and well, one of the closest songs this record gets to a ballad. I mean, it's piano led, which is just like something that immediately catches you off guard in this sort of storming world of rock instrumentation that dominates this album, more or less. And then that's just one of the most beautiful things about it. And then you go into Letter to Elise, which is
the I'd say the second most famous song from this album, probably.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the other songs that stands out the most in terms of like having these really immediate and beautiful melodies. I mean, as you said before, the guitar work here is astonishing. I mean, most of the guitars I think are played by Paul Thompson on this album, but you also have Perry Beaumonte as well, and even Robert Smith himself, who I read played all the guitars on From the Edge of the Deep Green Sea, including the solo, which he doesn't normally do. So that's like an interesting additional layer to that song as well. The soloing here, by the way, as well, doesn't always come up in every single song, but when it does, it's just like this. In a lot of ways, this era of The Cure and the way these songs are constructed, they're like layer cakes in a certain sense. Like,
Really,
there's just so much happening in these songs. The mixes are super, super layered. Often you're getting layers and layers of guitars in and of themselves before you even think about, you know, the rhythmic component as well. And it creates these massive soundscapes that are super dense as well. Like, these aren't particularly spaciously mixed either, although I will say that the recent reissue is like, you know, the original record, nothing wrong with the way it's mixed at all, but the recent reissue that came out this year is fantastic also, and just really, I think, just a little bit crisper in a way that I'm glad that they did. Because yeah, I mean, the thing about these Cure records is that Disintegration and Wish especially, there's just so much in these mixes that it can be overwhelming, especially if you don't have like really good headphones or a really good system as well. A lot of it can just kind of be this cloudy haze. And one of the things that maybe should be a little bit more appreciated about The Cure is how great they are at finding dynamics within such dense and clouded mixes, and also just how well pronounced and just still audible and clearly contributing every single element does. I mean, it's just really, really expertly produced, and clearly just obviously seasoned musicians who know how to convey the sound that they want to convey.
One of the first songs that I feel like teaches you about heartbreak, but from a perspective that's definitely a little bit more wizened, but it also just really indulges in the sort of forlorn, unrequited desire that you might have for somebody. And like one of the cool things about songs like this, and why I think this is one of my favorite albums just in general, is that it's really the delivery and the way he structures some of the verses at like the first couple of lines when he says, "So Elise, it doesn't matter what you say, I just can't stay here every," and then he just kind of, there's like a really brief pause, "every yesterday," and then just continues immediately after that. Like, just the way that these are delivered and written are so maximal in how he takes advantage of just the art of delivery, that it makes everything hit with a sort of immediacy that many lesser musicians simply wouldn't take advantage of. And it means that all of the lyricism on this album, which is just this heavily kind of like tempestuous storm of guitar tones and incredible fucking percussion and just like really dense mixes, it just really gives me everything I could possibly want out of an album experience like this. And Jesus Christ, this, like, I alluded earlier to the fact that the first half of this album is just like sensational. I love it a whole lot. But to me, everything after Friday I'm in Love, this is a stone cold 100 out of 100 track run, second half wise. I completely adore everything here. Again, we talked Friday I'm in Love, perfect. Trust, perfect. A Letter to Elise, perfect. And insanely underrated final three tracks, honestly. Cut, To Wish Impossible Things, and End is just like as good as this band fucking gets to me,
I think
honestly.
I don't have like much to say at this point because I would just be repeating things I've already said about other songs.
Mm-hmm.
But I do want to say that I think To Wish Impossible Things is a particularly underappreciated song. It's one of the
Yes.
most restrained on the album. It's one that maybe like, you know, the first one or two times you listen to the album, maybe won't leave as much of an impression as some of the other songs on this record. But I don't know, like there's something plaintive and just kind of like still about this song in a way that
Mm-hmm.
nothing else on the record is, that just feels like
Yeah.
an oasis in this kind of storm of emotions. And it's very wistful and it's very like kind of, you know, nostalgic, and Robert is writing in this very sort of like, you know, he's evoking those feelings in very simplistic ways. And, you know, but it is like musically and lyrically this most simplistic thing here. And it's so, it has this kind of almost, you know, unintentional reference here, not intending to reference another Cure song, but it has this almost lullaby-esque quality
Mm-hmm.
to it that I really, really value. And in the same way, and it does the same sort of thing as what Disintegration does, where you have like Homesick, and it serves that similar sort of purpose. And then you
Yeah.
get Untitled, which, you know, and you have End on this record, the actual final song, where, you know, that stillness essentially falls away and you're just left in this suspended space of, you know, spiraling basically. And it's, God, this song is just such a brutal end to the record as well. I mean,
Oh yeah.
ostensibly, it's one of the most meta songs on the record because it's essentially like Robert writing about being a songwriter as well and his relationship with his audience, essentially. But also,
Yeah.
like, obviously, it serves, you know, it fits in with the kind of relationship theme of the rest of the record as well. But I find it particularly interesting for that metatextual aspect as well. And yeah, and yeah, it's like such it's such a Robert Smith note in in this album on as well, like this, you know, desperate pleading to kind of be forgotten, essentially, basically.
Please stop loving me. I am none of these things.
Yeah,
Just
like I mean,
ah.
I get that ostensibly the song is about essentially about a different kind of relationship than the relationship depicted in a song like Trust, but that doesn't even really matter because, like, if you think about the dichotomy of these songs, right? Like, Trust is, you know, no matter what happens, if you leave me, if you're no longer in my life, like I am nothing. And then this song is kind of essentially be begging to be essentially left, essentially begging to be forgotten, basically, because you can't handle being loved. And that's like such a knife twist, essentially, to the idea of like experiencing such feelings of affection and devotion that you barely can even comprehend and contain them, which Robert talks about in this entire record so much. And you get to the end, and the flip side of that intense, you know, love that Robert feels is that he cannot, you know, receive it. He doesn't know how to receive it in return. So his curse is essentially to, you know, have these uncontrollable, obsessive, violent feelings of just total, complete obsession. And yet, if someone were to try and return that in any way, he simply wouldn't be able to handle it. Obviously, that dynamic, you know, works in the context of talking about relationships or whatever, but also here, when it becomes clear that Robert is essentially talking about how he doesn't know how to be, you know, famous, essentially, or how to be loved across the world. Essentially, it just adds this additional layer of heartbreak to the entire record that colors it, you know, backwards, essentially, and has you going back and reading so much of the devotional stuff that he's written on this album through a completely different lens, as opposed to just it being an interpersonal relationship, but actually being about, like, you know, how Robert's own relationship with being an artist, essentially, and being
Mm-hmm.
successful. And then if you read this whole record through that meta lens, then a song, you know, then it becomes even more ironic and kind of, you know, just sort of funny that this ended up being their most commercially successful record, record with their most commercially successful song, essentially catapulting them further. And then it becomes, you know, sort of slightly less surprising that essentially the band kind of imploded after this album. I mean, this was the final album that Boris Williams was on, and there were some significant lineup changes after this point, and then the frequency with which the band would release albums would get more and more sort of sporadic, essentially. So this is kind of like the apotheosis of the Cure in so many of the ways that we've already outlined, but it's also kind of like the last hurrah. I mean, not to say they wouldn't go on to release great albums. We've already said about how much we love Blood Flowers, but this is really the last Imperial Cure album. And it has that weight of an ending to it as well. I mean, even with Robert going as far as to title the closing track End, it's almost as if he knows in a certain sense that, that there's something that this represents the end of that is going to be, is gone forever now. And that, you know, it gives the whole album that additional weight and pathos, you know, in the context of the Cure's career as well. It's amazing.
I think that too, there is another way that like a lot of the writing here on the whole album, I think, is really multifaceted. You can look at it from a couple's perspectives, and the end definitely like recontextualizes the album a little bit, and it certainly makes it feel like a more dour album than maybe it is on the holistic level. But I also think that there is like Robert's analogs in writing and his sort of self-insert characters, just the dilemmas that a lot of the people he talks about in his songwriting on this album specifically, that it's talking about their unhealthy dependency on the object of their affections. And I do feel like that even though this is a dour end of the record, it also signifies the ability to sort of take that the dependency and kind of cast it aside a little bit and just be like accepting, you know, I'm none of these things, please don't love me. It's sort of him arriving at the very, very difficult and heartbreaking conclusion that he has to separate himself from it, but something that will ultimately lead to him being a more healthy like person, I think. So there's a sort of like there's just a brutal melancholy throughout this whole record that really captures the essence of honest to God mania, where it's not really about the highs are great and the lows are sad. It's really more of just like an extreme exploration of different emotional polarities and then just sort of learning how to live with both. I think that structurally speaking, to me anyway, the first half of the album is really more of the more upbeat and more forlorn, more like just, you know, God, I love you so much songs. And then the second half is all reckoning with the sort of raw emotions, and then the end kind of tying a bow on the whole thing, and just the way it manages to exercise its own duality throughout its structure, throughout its songs, throughout the thematic content of the album. It's just something that I find endlessly fascinating, endlessly rewarding, emotionally rich, and instrumentally dense. There's everything I could possibly want out of a Cure album here, and I do feel like the construction of it as a record is basically about as strong as they'd ever be. At this point in their career, it really feels like they were riding a high of just, you know, success after success after success. Like, I mean, Jesus Christ, I don't know why the sort of streak of albums they have isn't really talked about a bit more, but I mean, Jesus fucking Christ. Pornography, like I'll even stand up a little bit for something like The Top, which is certainly not as good as the albums that surround it, but like Faith, Pornography, The Top, The Head on the Door, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Kiss Me, Disintegration, and then you end that streak with fucking Wish. That's one of the best runs any band's ever had. Fucking period, bitch.
So true. All right, favorite tracks and ratings then. Jake, you go first.
My favorite song on here gotta be Open, favorite Cure song. Then I'll say shit. I really love Cut so much. It's one of the most direct and hard-hitting Cure songs. This is one of those where you can tell the alternative rock and grunge sound made its way even into like stuff like this in terms of the deep cuts. So I'll say that. And yeah, Letter to Elise. Least favorite track. We didn't really talk about it, but at least in I like I'm guessing this is probably going to be your answer too, just because we both didn't talk about it. But I do think that Wendy Time is the weakest song on here. I really like the song. I
I
really
like it
like
a
where it
lot
is
too.
in the album. Yeah, it's a really good song, but it's again, it's a really good song. Actually, really great song on an album full of perfect songs. So I will concede that that is probably the weakest moment on here, and it is like the most instrumentally kind of gonzo weird shit that the album explores. So it does stick out just a little bit, but the more I listen to it, the more I'm in love with how this album flows. So I can't fault it really all that much. And when you're that good of a song to begin with, it's like when that's your floor, like Jesus. So yeah, this is 10 out of 10 for me. Jake Cannon classic. We've been reviewing a lot of those lately. I've been happy.
Mm.
Top 40 record for me.
All right, Morgan's given it an 8. As for me, my three favorite tracks are, yeah, From the Edge of the Deep Green Sea, Friday I'm in Love, and Trust. Very easy. Um, yeah, I didn't really get to talk about Windy Time. It's not because I think it's a weak song even for this record. I really, really
Yeah.
love it actually.
Yeah.
It's just it kind of the whole sonic palette of it is just a little bit different from the other stuff, so it kind of is a little bit different to talk about in that same
And it's more
context.
emotionally irreverent. It's like the only irreverent song on here.
Yeah, but you know what? I'm not even going to pick it as my least favorite, just to be original, because I
Eh,
just it's really grown on me. For least
ditto.
favorite, I will pick a song that is not in any way, flawed. Really, it's just kind of a little bit redundant, and structurally, it just kind of wrong foots the album a little bit early on in a way that I don't quite care for, and that's Apart. Again, still a really great song, but that will be the one I would, I guess, remove from the album if I had to remove one. But yeah, it's a fantastic album, one of my absolute favorite Cure albums. It's probably my second favorite behind Disintegration, but very, very close. Those two are essentially twin, colossal, perfect albums, more or less, to me. I'm going to give this a 9. Which means we get an average overall of 9.0 for The Cure's Wish. Let us know what you think of Wish in the comments below. Is it your favorite Cure record? If not, where would it fit in your ranking? What are your favorite songs? What are your favorite deep cuts? What do you think about the overall tone, themes, feel of the record, and where it sits in the Cure's discography? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider giving it a like and subscribing if you haven't already. Both those things help us a lot to be able to keep doing this. Plus, if you want to support us even more, you can hit the join button, and for just $1 a month, you can become a member of the Jams and Tea family. Get your name in the title crawl of every video on this channel. Plus, if you recommend us some music to listen to and to talk about on the main show, your recommendation will go to the top of the pile. As always, though, folks, rock over London, rock on Chicago, Coca-Cola, open happiness.